The next step in the hype cycle, guys, we all know it plays out every goddamn time and we're all surprised, is the trough of disillusionment. You don't need to be Nostradamus to predict that there is going to be a trough of disillusionment.
What's fueling a lot of this AI bubble is this concept that if you win this, the pot is so huge, you just have no choice but to go all in, just in case you win.
Every major platform shift reshuffles the deck on winners and losers. I think Mark Zuckerberg knows that.
You're listening to the Startup Podcast. This is a Reacts episode.
Hey, I'm Chris Saad.
And I'm Yaniv Bernstein.
And on today's show, we ask the question, is the AI hype bubble over? Are we ready for the trough of disillusionment? Is the correction we're all experiencing today about to become a massive bubble burst? And why is Meta reorging their AI division and downscaling? Is this the beginning of the end? We're going to touch on all that and much, much more on this week's show right after the break.
Today's episode of the Startup Podcast is brought to you by .tech domains. One thing about starting your startup that should be easy but isn't is naming it. Why is it so hard? Because all the good .com domain names are taken. So you end up doing something silly like misspelling it or adding random prefixes or suffixes. No more. Your domain shows your focus and intent, so you should make it sharp, clean, and unmistakably tech with a .tech domain. Head to get.tech/TSP or a registrar like GoDaddy to grab your .tech domain today. That's www.get.tech/TSP for the Startup Podcast.
All right, our first story is Meta makes another restructure for its AI team. In June 2025, Meta established the Meta Superintelligence Lab to spearhead its ambitions towards superintelligence, big investments, and a controlling stake in scale AI. We all know Meta and Mark Zuckerberg are super interested in winning this space. They have Llama and they're investing heavily. They're trying to poach people with crazy offers. And they've gone through several AI reorgs trying to separate product development from foundational AI research, infrastructure, and so on. But this week, they're making another change. They're splitting its AI division, MSL, into 4 subunits, each focused respectively on AI research, superintelligence, AI products, and infrastructure, formalizing what has been discussed internally for a little while, apparently. As part of this shakeup, the company is considering an overall downsizing of its AI division, potentially eliminating roles or reallocating staff to other parts of the business. And several high-level execs are expected to leave amongst the reorg. And Meta apparently is also exploring the use of third-party AI models, potentially open source or licensed closed source alternatives to power its AI products, indicating a shift away from exclusively building in-house. Yaniv, what do you make about this? There's actually a number of very serious structural changes over at Meta.
Yeah, I think there are a few angles here. I think there's like the Meta angle and the overall AI industry, AI bubble angle.
Meta being the company or Meta being the abstraction level
yes.
of your argument?
Meta, the company formerly known as Facebook.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, so in terms of Meta, like they're in an interesting position as an AI company. And this maybe speaks to the difference between being a sort of an AI infrastructure foundation model company and being an AI application company. So Meta have been absolutely minting money. And a big reason for that is because they have been able to use AI to optimize their ad systems even further, right? And so in some ways, out of the Mag 7, like in terms of actual revenue or like bottom line to the business, in some ways they've been the biggest beneficiary of AI. But at the same time, they've had this, I don't know what you call it, like the sense that they need to be in the game, that they shouldn't just use someone else's model to optimize what they do or, you know, have it for in-house purposes. They want it to be a frontier, top-tier AI company. And, you know, you can argue that's because of the stock market. You can argue that's because of Mark Zuckerberg's ego. You can argue that there's a bigger strategy at play here, right? But they were talking about Llama and Superintelligence and all of that, competing with Google, competing with OpenAI, Anthropic, all of these other folks. And that hasn't been going so well. And furthermore, it's not that clear the way in which that contributes to Facebook's business. You know, for Google, it's very clear. They have a cloud business and they have a search business, and foundational AI is going to be really important to both. OpenAI and Anthropic, they are AI native companies. But what exactly does Facebook benefit from owning a foundation model? It's not that clear. And yet, just as recently as a month ago, Chris, we were doing stories about Facebook spending crazy money to hire individual people. Apparently, one person got $1 billion offer to join as an employee. $1 billion over 4 years. So that's insane. But, you know, it feels like there's an about face here. I don't know what caused that. But that structure into which they're breaking up, I think this is interesting. And this is maybe where I would hand back to you, Chris, right? Because they're talking about having these 4 different areas: AI research, superintelligence, AI products, and infrastructure. The interesting thing is these divisions are at completely different layers of the stack. And some of them have a really neat tie-in to overall meta Facebook strategy. And others, in my view, don't really at all. So it'll be interesting to see how that actually plays into Facebook's ability to progress on all this.
You're thinking, I think, of Meta still as a social networking company or a social apps company. And I don't think Mark Zuckerberg has...
Because that's what it is.
No, Mark Zuckerberg has never
That's what it is.
thought of Meta as a social networking company. I think very, very early on, he's thought of it as the human connection company, and more broadly than that, one of the top 4, 5, 6 tech companies in the history of the world.
Yeah, but he's wrong and I'm right. So that's the thing.
Well, he's the one making the decisions, Yaniv.
That's
We're
true.
pontificating on a podcast. His decisions are informed by his intent, right? His belief. And he believes that they should be investing in running the table on and a key player through all of these major platform shifts. And one of the reasons is he deeply understands the concept of platform risk. Not the only reason, but one of the reasons. Other than his own ego, his own ambition, his own scale, and so on, he understands platform risk like few others do in the world, because Facebook platform created a lot of platform risk for their developer ecosystem, and Facebook has been the subject of a lot of platform risk thanks to Apple and their whims in the App Store and limited what he is able to do on the iPhone and in some cases on Android. And so I've heard him say, and it's been reported that he just basically does not want to be the subject of platform risk in the future, and wants to do everything he can do to be the main gatekeeper of the next platform. He initially thought that would be VR, AR, XR. He probably still believes that to some degree over the full arc of history, but he thinks AI certainly is right now the next platform, and he doesn't want to be subject to the whims of OpenAI or Anthropic or anybody else. And so it makes a lot of sense to me as part of his ambition to be one of the top tech platforms, a hardcore engineering company, and not subject to platform risk, that he would be pursuing this. It makes total sense.
I agree with that, but I would actually say that Facebook and Meta have a long history of failure in trying to address that platform risk. So they have been intermediated for a long time now. In fact, forever, right? They've always been intermediated through somebody, either through a web browser or then through a mobile operating system and device. And, it's still one of those things where their big competitors have platforms and they've tried to break in. You mentioned AR and XR. In an earlier stage, they tried to do an end run around Google and have their own version of Android. That failed. And so they're still, in a sense, beholden to others for distribution. And yes, I think Mark Zuckerberg, as a founder CEO, he doesn't give up easy, as you say, Chris. And so he's like, let's have another crack at it. That makes sense. But I would point out that Facebook has actually faced this platform risk for a long time and has never been able to adequately address it. And I don't see strong signals that would be different this time around in terms of their positioning.
Yeah, that may very well be. You mentioned they tried the phone, the Facebook phone. They tried the Facebook portal. They are now doing the glasses. I'm wearing them right now. And you're right. They've tried and mostly failed. That doesn't mean he's not going to try again. And the notion of him and Meta being a hardcore engineering company is very, very important to him. He doesn't think of himself as like a social networking company. He speaks very proudly of how they are a hardcore engineering company, and they're going to keep exercising that muscle for the latest trends and platforms until they break through. And I think he thinks, and I certainly don't disagree with him, it's a matter of timing and it's a matter of moving fast. So, we keep saying on this show, I do at least, is that every major platform shift reshuffles the deck on winners and losers. I think Mark Zuckerberg knows that. And he thinks if he can catch the AI wave or the smart glasses wave at the right time, he's in with a chance. And it's certainly the only chance he's got, right? He's not going to go beat iPhone at their own game during status quo. And so, he's going to keep trying. And I think he's having some inroads. And if I were him, I would be making the same attempts. I'm sure we would be having the same middling success, but we would be trying, right? And as it relates to the reorg specifically, on one hand, reorgs are not a bad thing necessarily. They mean that the leadership is making decisive choices, and they're moving things around to optimize. And too many companies spend too long languishing in bad structures with bad people. And I'm a big fan of like clean up the org. The org is the thing that builds the thing. Organizing it specifically into layers in the stack. Absolutely, yes. You need the layers that he's moved it into reportedly seem exactly right to me. Those are a key part of they're the key separations of concern, if you will. Within those layers, there will, of course, need to be yet more structure, and understanding that will be a harder job, actually, because so some of those will have more interactions within each other. The idea of downsizing the AI org, I think, is a complicated one. On one hand, downsizing is often the headline, but it's not the truth. It's just getting more efficient. You're getting rid of bloated structure, getting rid of inefficient roles or inefficient people. And at first, it looks like downsizing, but really, it's trimming back in order to grow. On the other hand, I posted on LinkedIn today. And I was talking to you before the show started. I'm really struggling with the diminishing returns on AI. And I do think that some of these companies surely are noticing the same thing I am, which is, I mean, we've asked ChatGPT to make a script for us for the Reacts. Like, what are the biggest stories and what are the biggest points of context? And it's
So if you hate this episode, guys, blame Sam Altman.
But it's not doing a very good job. And maybe it's a slow news week and it's like reaching for crappy stories or something, but I had to really struggle to have it understand my intent and understand how to write a script that was at the right level of abstraction for, prompting us for what we want to talk about versus being too verbose. It would say things like vague assertions, but never give me the names of the people involved. And, I told it, give me the bullet points to run a podcast kind of agenda, and just couldn't seem to find its way to that solution. And I've been having this feeling over and over again, and even with ChatGPT 5. And so I do think there's going to start to be a little bit of a correction in the hype. We're at the peak hype. The next step in the hype cycle, guys, we all know it. It plays out every goddamn time, and we're all surprised, is the trough of disillusionment. And you don't need to be an incredible... You don't need to be Nostradamus to predict that there is going to be a trough of disillusionment, and it's probably, like right now, we're down a few percent on the stock market. I'm down 5 or 6% on the Mag 7. Is it this week? By the time you're watching this episode, are we already, well and truly into it? I don't know, but I think there's probably room for a bit of trimming of the sails.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I had a couple of other thoughts that occurred to me while you were speaking. So that kind of tied the Facebook Meta piece together, as well as that broader picture, Chris. So there's a people angle to this as well, which is for a long time, Meta's intelligence lab was led by an old school AI researcher called Jan LeCun, very highly regarded. And then more recently, they did what's now referred to as a reverse acquihire, right? Where they got this guy, Alexander Wang from Relevance AI, was it, Chris?
I don't know, but I call it a corporate raid, not a reverse acquihire.
Yeah, and so they brought in this other big heavy hitter from the AI world, and so gave him some leadership. And now, here's the interesting thing. Jan LeCun has always been somewhat bearish on LLMs, right? So remember, AI is actually a broad tent of different technologies. The one that has taken all our breath away and gotten all the hype for the last few years since ChatGPT came out is large language models. And Jan LeCun was always a bit of a skeptic about them. In the meantime, Alexander Wang came in from that whole LLM world. And, perhaps I think he was sort of given the new crown as the person to do this. But I think the interesting thing is, to your point, Chris, is maybe LLMs are amazing in certain ways, but they have these limitations. We're now in the trough of disillusionment. Meta maybe has a chance to position itself with Jan LeCun as doing other types of AI that can push the frontier forward. I'm not sure. And I wonder to what extent this sort of battle of personalities and different research philosophies, and also, the way the technology seems to be falling, where all of that plays into this, and whether this AI hype cycle will maybe transition from being an LLM hype cycle to more broadly thinking about the different types of AI technology that are available and how they can complement each other with the huge amounts of compute that are now available.
It has to. It has to. If I was Meta or OpenAI or whatever, I would have an entire division obsessed with the question of architecture, of model design, and asking the question, how do you make a more efficient LLM, as Elon Musk seems to have done with this kind of community of LLMs that, fire off 20 agents and they all come back with different answers, as DeepSeek seemed to have done at one point in history. And also there are other models, right? And other architectures that have not been taken to the scale that LLM has. And I would have them beavering away at that day in and day out, and with some massive incentive for the first person to crack the code. And so you have to ask yourself, is this architecture really the beginning and the end of real AI? At the same time, though, you need a large set of people, infrastructure and platform services and applications, that are betting on the thing that works now, which is LLMs. And it needs to be probably a multi-model strategy. Yes, they've got Llama 3. There still isn't a Llama 4. And so they need to have a middleware that makes the application tier model independent. A little bit of OpenAI here, a little bit of Claude there. And when there's a new architecture, if there's a new architecture internally or externally, they can also plug that in as well. So it's about clever software and architecture choices as well as clever product and application choices. They're going to have to do all of the above.
All the best .coms are taken or crazily overpriced, so you settle on a workaround domain for your website. Don't compromise. Get a clean, sharp .tech domain that instantly says, this is a tech startup. Grab yours at get.tech/TSP for the Startup Podcast or via domain registrars like GoDaddy. One other thought I had, Chris, is I'm trying to think about what are some of the lessons that founders can take away from this. And I feel like Meta have been facing a gigantic version of the build versus buy problem, right? Obviously, AI is really important to them. I think it's so tempting when there's something that's really important to you in your business to say, well, we're going to build it ourselves so it can meet our very own needs. But usually there's an option to get it from somebody else. And that's known as the build versus buy decision. And it's not an easy choice to make. Building gives you this illusion of control. And sometimes it is real, right? I shouldn't call it an illusion of control. Sometimes that control is real and material and valuable. And sometimes it's an illusion. It is a costly kind of boondoggle where you can burn huge amounts of money when you could have just as easily pulled something off the shelf and gotten it much cheaper and more easily, and it would meet your needs just as well.
I think that's a funny observation, and I think you're right to a degree. You're right for most startups and most operators in most parts of the world doing most things. But for Meta, again, and for AI specifically, this is existential. There will be 4, 5, 6 major hyperscalers that own, if the GPT, LLM AI story plays out, and we're talking today about the trough of disillusionment, but if that hype plays out, there will be a small handful of companies that accrue the majority of economic value in the world. And the first to hit superintelligence, or the first few, will achieve runaway escape velocity. So if you have billions of dollars and a hardcore engineering team, you sort of have no choice but to try to capture that opportunity. Whether it is core to your perceived business, as a social network company or a hardware company or a, information organization company. I'm talking, of course, of Meta and Apple and Google. It doesn't matter what you're perceived to be. You need to become the AI superintelligence company overnight. If that hype is to play out, if that story is to play out, because the upside opportunity is infinite and the downside risk is a few years of burning billions of dollars, which you had on your balance sheet anyway. To me, it's a simple calculation.
Well, it's an interesting calculation because, what's actually going on under the hood is what's called expected value maximization, right? It's just a very simple statistical principle, right? Let's say that you've got a 10% chance of $1 billion outcome. 10% times $1 billion is $100 million. So the expected value is $100 million of making that bet, right?
Except the actual outcome is 0 or 1 billion.
Exactly. What's the funny thing about averages?
Yeah, the mathematical weighting system, sure, but if you're Mark Zuckerberg and you got money laying around and your upside is the 10 billion in his dollars. Like, it's not 100 million. It's a billion. It's infinite, right?
Well, that's what I'm trying to get at. If you hadn't interrupted me, is I'm saying like that's what expected value maximization is. When you talk about AGI, the problem is that the upside scenario, like you've got some percent chance of achieving AGI, and if you do, then the upside is kind of considered to be effectively infinite, or like, half the GDP of the world. So even if it's just a 1% chance of getting there, you do the maths and you're like, well, I've got a 1% chance of making $100 trillion. That's $1 trillion. So it's worth spending a lot of money, even on that expected value outcome. And the question is that valid? And, this sorts of statistical maths sort of falls apart a little bit at these tails of the distribution. It gets a bit weird, but that is kind of the math that's happening. And that, I think, is kind of what's fueling a lot of this AI bubble, is this concept that the upside scenario, like if you win this, the pot is so huge that you just have no choice but to go all in just in case you win.
Yeah, it's sort of like the numbers in Einstein's math get weird at the edges, right? And it's called the singularity. And so that's what the tech bros, the tech community, the futurists have been predicting for ages. And everybody's wondering, is this the event horizon? The numbers in terms of economics become bewildering. The numbers in terms of physics become bewildering. And the numbers in terms of societal acceleration become bewildering. And you can't be the also-ran, up in your social networking ivory tower and go, we don't need one of those. We'll license it from OpenAI, right? It has to be, we invented one of those, we're running one of those. And yeah, again, the image that always comes to my mind, if anyone's watched Westworld, is Rehoboam, right? It's that giant sphere in that HQ somewhere running the world, running all social scoring, reputation, credit scores, behavioral, managing and directing people, operating society. And not just operating it, but accelerating it, discovering new cures, discovering new materials, discovering, new energy sources. And I'm saying all this, recognizing this is the hype, this is the dream, and no one's really sure what will really materialize.
But there's something very interesting and this is actually quite disturbing, right? Once you internalize that mental framework, there are only really two possible outcomes. One is that nobody achieves this massive AGI singularity, in which case this is the mother of all bubbles, and that explains a lot of that bubbly kind of thinking, because all of the money being pumped into it is based on this premise that you're going to get to that point. Or the other outcome is that somebody does get to that point, and then you have one or maybe two private companies basically controlling the future of humanity. So I'm not sure I love either of those outcomes, Chris, but that seems to be like, if you logically think through things, that's really the only two ways it can go.
Yeah, I think, to just continue that analogy to the .com era, everyone was super hyped about the internet transforming all of society, laying crap loads of cable, starting up these incredibly fantastical companies about ordering everything online and, having dog walkers and all sorts of stuff. And all of it came crashing down. But guess what also happened? All of it came true, except 10, 20, 30 years later. So the dot-com bubble was not a bubble of misaligned expectations in terms of substance, but rather of timing. And all that dark fiber got used. All of those dot-com companies got created. All of that value and society transformation occurred. It just didn't occur on the time scale that people wanted. I think the same thing will happen with AI. In some ways, in the fullness of time, all of this compute capacity is going to get used. All of this potential will be soaked up and applied in some way over the next 10, 20, 30 years at most. And the difference now is there is actual money being made. Actually, revenue is increasing as a result of these AI products and features and services. Now, here's the little twist that you don't hear on MSNBC. The revenue is being made in line with the valuations, even though the valuations are, certainly getting stretched. But this is people paying for the hype, so that they're paying for the AI features. The people paying Microsoft for Copilot. They're paying Windsurf for Windsurf's AI features. They're paying for their new iPhone for the Apple Intelligence features, which they never got, right? And then all of these hyperscalers are paying NVIDIA for NVIDIA chips. And so NVIDIA is making more revenue. But this can all go away when people decide, well, actually, Copilot's a piece of shit and it's not really helping us. I saw a headline yesterday saying people think they're more productive with AI, but actually they end up being less productive because there's a lot of motion, but not a lot of product, not a lot of output. And so if they start to think like, actually, this LLM is getting in my way, and so the cost of an LLM, the value of an LLM starts to compress, the revenues start to reshape or diminish. People stop building out data centers, NVIDIA's revenue evaporates, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I do think it's still all possible. Anyone who tells you they know what's going to happen is full of shit. But it's not a slam dunk. We just got to feel our way through. And again, I'm putting my money where my mouth is, or rather, I'm putting my money on one side of the outcome, which is I'm heavily invested in the Magnificent Seven, betting that they're going to figure it out. And I'm down 5-6% today because there's a bit of a correction going on, and so we'll see. We'll see if this turns into a .com burst or just keeps going.
Yeah, and even if it bursts, as you say, Chris, I feel like the shards of the shattered bubble of .com were the foundation of the modern internet, and I have no doubt that even if this AI bubble bursts, it will leave the world of tech and the world more generally in a very different place for future progress.
Yes, and it will be, I estimate, the Magnificent Seven who will benefit the most, whether they're running most of the GDP of the world or they're just running a lot of it like they've been doing historically. They're going to continue to be some of the most important and valuable companies in the history of the world. All right, well, those are our thoughts. What do you guys think? Jump down in the comments, let us know. Is this the beginning of the end of the bubble? And we're now due for the trough of disillusionment? Are these LLMs really reaching their local maximums? Or is this just a little blip, little pause? Everyone's got a bit of cold feet. Maybe Meta's just pruning a little before growing again. Let us know your thoughts down in the comments and we'll jump down and join the conversation.
All right, that's the pod. Chris, how could people find you online if they wish to do so?
You can find me on all the social media at Chris Saad or on my site, chrissaad.com, and my newsletter, chrissaad.com/newsletter. How about you, Yaniv?
I am on LinkedIn trying to make it a less boring place. Send me a connection request, tell me you're a TSP listener, and I will gladly accept it. I'm also raising a pre-seed round for my startup, Violet. So if you do a little bit of angel investing and keen to learn more, send me a DM. Thanks to those of you who already have.
Or if you're a big-time VC in Silicon Valley, you're probably better as well.
Right on.
All right, guys. Well, thanks for listening. We'll catch you in the next one. Bye-bye.